Welcome to today's government contracting update. I'm Ricky Brown, and this is GovCon Ready in 30. Pretty moderate week. It's just normal. We're going to talk about what changed, what didn't change, and also how it affects you. Why is it important? Should be pretty simple. Not too much going on. Like I said, it's a moderate week. But before we get into it, let's recap last week. So last week we had an update or an alert about a deviation for fiscal year 26, and it's pretty standard, nothing ground shaking or earth shattering. Just basically stating that the DoD basically issued a deviation to say, hey, we're going to deviate from how we normally procure or buy things. And we're going to go away from the rule. And the rule is basically we got to have the money before we solicit. And if we don't have the money, we're not going to issue the solicitation. So the deviation allows them to issue the solicitation in advance or before the money drops, and move along in the process so they don't slip on the schedule and everything. So that was one of the deviations that came out. Also, there was another deviation, RFO, Revolutionary Far Overhaul deviation, that came out last week about the CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification, on the way that they're going to handle that. So that's evolving. If the big takeaway from that is, if you are actively looking for solicitations to bid on solicitations, then make sure you're looking for that deviation and you're complying with it, because cybersecurity, NIST and NIST and CMMC, that's a big deal in the federal government. So you want to make sure you have your appropriate NIST scores or CMMC levels. That's pretty big right now. And then just SBIC, the way they're doing the capital, providing the capital and investments and stuff. If you're looking for funding with the SBA, then that's an important update with how they're doing that. But nothing necessarily related to contracting, but it's relevant if you're trying to look for money with the SBA. So let's move on in an update for this week. I mentioned last week how the I mentioned last week in how semiconductors, there was a proposed rule with the semiconductors. So that progressed, and it's not necessarily a notice now. It moved from being just a notice or a heads up to an actual proposed rule. So if you're in the IT space, just be prepared for that. I'll talk a little bit more about it later. But it did move and progress from being just like a heads up or a notice to actually being published. So that's something to just be aware of. Let's see. So we'll jump right into it. Since I kind of mentioned it, the semiconductor prohibition proposed FAR rule is published, and basically now is the window of, if you are in the IT space, telecommunication space, or anywhere in that supply chain, this prohibition limiting where you get certain semiconductors from could affect your business. Now, if it does, you have until April, I believe, 20th of this year to provide comments. Now, this is key because you have input on how this rule may pan out. If they decide to move forward with this proposed rule, then it goes into effect December of 2027, not this December, but next December in 27. So like I said, if you're in this space, it's important that you respond and provide your comments on how it could affect your business or what it could do, or just whatever comments that you have. Some people, to be specific or to help you out, some people that this may affect is a IT reseller, telecom vendors, electronic manufacturers, different things of that nature, and it's highly relevant for that space. So like I said, if you're a service provider in the tech world, make sure you're providing your comments before April 20th. All right, because it will affect you moving forward. Let's see. There are two OMB review notices that are, out there. And basically, one of them is FAR Part 27 requirements collection, and this is just an information collection. Actually, both notices are information collections. There's nothing, excuse me, there's nothing major about the two notices, just something to be aware of. So it actually says information collection notice tied to FAR Part 27. So if it's connected to like information or intellectual property, royalties, or that type of related purchasing or reporting. Another one is like a Buy American Act, trade agreements, duty-free entries, just notices like that. So something to be aware of if you're in that space. There are no new rules or anything, but if you have been asked to collect information or provide information to a contracting officer or anything of that nature, you need to be aware of that. But the big thing that I really wanted to get to is the GAO lessons learned, and two cases from GAO that actually was settled this past week. And one of them basically is an agency determined that a contractor's offer's price was too high. So they were unreasonably high pricing, right? And so they excluded them from competition. Well, the contractor was a little upset, so they protested. Well, the GAO upheld the agency's stance to say, hey, if they're unreasonably high, then they're not an interested vendor or interested party. So they don't, get to continue to protest or ask for information or anything else like that because they were excluded from the competition. Now, this is important because if we're doing trade-off and you are basically trying to trade off and offer a better quality management or whatever, you're giving the government, a better or a higher premium somewhere, then your price, of course, can reflect them. You charge higher. Well, that doesn't just mean you can charge whatever you want. It has to be reasonable and defensible. You got to say, hey, no, my prices are defensible. I'm not just charging high for no reason. And that's the big takeaway there. You be able to defend your pricing, because if the government labels you as unreasonably high, it excludes you from competition, and then it limits you for the information that you can obtain and receive later on down the line. Another one is basically an agency decide to pivot on how they previously solicited a requirement. So, there are different contracting avenues that you can go down. If I want to go full and open, small business, or federal supply schedule as a contracting officer, I have that leeway to do so. Well, this GAO case basically said that the agency is allowed to switch gears just because the agency went one direction on a previous acquisition doesn't mean they have to go that same direction. So something that was either small business set aside or open market, that they decided to go federal supply schedule approach, and it was a protest. Well, it was upheld and the agency was allowed to do that. So just be mindful of that acquisitions don't have to go the same route each and every time something's solicited, and that was a major GL case for that. What to do moving forward with what the updates that I provided. If you sell IT, telecom, or electronics, it's important. Make sure that you're providing comments by April 20th, okay? So that your input is heard, and you can steer that acquisition. Also, with the deviations, all the deviations that's coming out, make sure you're reading the solicitations and checking for deviations. Other than that, nothing big, nothing earth-shattering. Also, and with the GAO cases, make sure you're disciplined in your proposals and your pricing, and how you are basically pricing your services and your supplies and everything. Because if you're ruled unreasonably high, then you can just get basically kicked out of competition and not be considered and not get additional information that may be vital for your success as a business. All right. Also understand the difference between proposed rules and effective rules. Proposed rules often come with comments and an ability to kind of steer or modify that rule based on your comments. An effective rule is different. It's already solidified, and this is the rule moving forward. So that is another big thing. And then also how agencies buy stuff can change. Just because they bought it one way in the past doesn't mean that they have to buy it that same way moving forward. Okay, so these are the updates for this week, and just stay consistent, stay grinding, and I'll see you here next week on the next contracting update brief. See you soon.